Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Mind-Boggling Concepts in the Torah. Parsha NASO. So Rav Yaakov Weinberg, he says there are two mitzvahs in the Torah that need a nace to be able to fulfill. Right? What are the two mitzvahs? Don't answer all at once. You're on mute. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think we covered this. One was the Tzara'at, and the other one was Sotah.
That's right. Sotah is this week's Parsha. Right?
Right.
So he talked about Saras, which deals with the issue surrounding, well, one of the aspects of Saras is Lashon Hara. So he explains that if you need a nace, the Rambam says that the Almighty doesn't like doing nissi miracles. That's not his cup of tea. It's sort of like a watchmaker. You know, in the good old days when watches were made were real watches, not like these electronic things, but real watches with springs and dials and all kinds of stuff, right? So a watchmaker was a real craftsman, and each watch was individually made, handmade.
Mm-hmm. So
the expertise of a great watchmaker is, I remember when these first electronic watches came out, the first digital watches came out, that they claimed that they only lost a second every 100 years or something like that. So, not that you'd keep it that long to find out, but you bring it back. This my watch lost a second. Right? But in the old days, the mechanical watches, that was a really big deal and very difficult to achieve. So even more so, the Almighty, we created the world in such a way that it shouldn't need touching up. It shouldn't need the watchmaker, so to speak, to come in and fiddle with the dials and the gears to fix the process by which the world should run by itself. It says that Shlomo Melech had a throne that was engineered in such a way that only he could sit on it. That it had certain mechanical a process, like Indiana Jones in these the old Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Shlomo Melech created such things, and it was mechanical devices that no one else could sit on. It was programmed for his way. I don't know exactly how. I don't know if we know how exactly it functioned, but anyway, that's the idea. So if you have to have a nace, it means that these mitzvahs are beyond normal functionality. They're so difficult that you need a nace to be able to do it. So one is Savas, which refers again back to Lashon Hara. It's so difficult. In fact, the Talmud says that some people are over Gesel. I forget how's it go. Some people over Arias, a lot of people over Gesel, and everybody is over Avek Lashon Hara.
Right, I remember this.
Right, that's a big deal, right? Which is a strange thing because how can you be held responsible for something that nobody has the ability to overcome, to control? But we talked about that then. We're not going to go back over it again. But with this week's part, we have Sotah. And Sotah, just to briefly recap the mitzvah, if God forbid somebody suspects their wife of doing something not appropriate, he brings her to the temple. She drinks this water. And if she really did something not appropriate, if she's really guilty, she blows up. Right, when that happens. And if she's good, right, then she gets pregnant, and everybody's happy. And there's there's a famous chazal on this. The Talmud says that one of the ways in which the water works is they would take water and then they would take some dust from the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, and then they would take this pasuk and they would drop it in the water, and the ink would dissolve into the water. And that's an Issa Deraisa, one of the 10 Commandments. Don't erase God's name. And nevertheless, that's what we do. So the Talmud says, how is this possible? How do we do this? So for Shalom Bayis, a peace in the house, the Almighty allows his name to be erased. Right, Yvonne?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a very strange thing because you suspect your next door neighbor of being a psychopath, and people are disappearing off the streets of wherever you live. Right? There is no process unless you have 2 witnesses to be able to testify that they actually saw him do it. You can have like very good evidence that he did it. He went into a room, there's him and the victim. You heard gunshots. He walks out. The guy's dead. Right? Everything there is indicating that the guy did it. Nevertheless, a quick letter on the floor. There's nothing you can do. Right? But here, a person suspects his wife. That's all he has is a suspicion. Now there is a warning. So there is, but nevertheless, there's no hard evidence. And nevertheless, he brings it to the temple to find out whether she's a Sotah or not, whether she actually did it or not.
Right.
Is that why here is the Torah going out of its way to allow this to happen? Ifan, you have the question?
Because it's important. The connection between husband and wife is important.
That's true. And keeping psychopaths off the street is very important too.
Yeah, but if the core, which is the family, which is what makes up, lots of different families make up society, if the core starts rotting away, then forget about it. One psychopath, how many psychopaths are there per 1,000,000 people? 1, 2? I don't know. Find out from the New York statistics, like how many psychopaths are there?
Well, I'll tell you something very interesting to make it a little bit more interesting. So the Talmud says that when it became prevalent that these women were blowing up, the rabbis banned the process.
Right.
Which would seem to contradict the whole concept. Here you are, you're catching women doing something they shouldn't be doing. Now, there's a very similar thing happened by murder. When it became prevalent that they were catching murderers, that with real witnesses and evidence, the whole thing, the rabbis banned that too.
They banned what?
They banned the death sentence.
Really?
It makes sense because if you see too often such a thing, then it becomes commonplace, and you don't want that to happen either.
Yeah, then why ban it? You want to put these people away. You want to take them out. They banned the death sentence. In the same way they banned the Sotah process.
Because then seeing women blow up, or murderers or whatever get killed, is not good for society either.
That's true.
It promotes more of the same. It's a darkness. The whole thing is a type of darkness,
That's very true. I think you're on the right track here. So you see, the whole point of Sotah is not to catch women who are guilty. It's to prove the women who are innocent.
Right, so that their husbands trust them again.
Right. Now, why do we have to have a nace for such a thing? Right?
Why do you have to have a nace? Because only God knows, and there's no way to assuage the jealousy and the anger of the husband without something that is so divinely
Orchestrated.
justified or excused or whatever. In other words, God's the only one that really knows.
That's true, but that's true with everything. You could say that about any crime. God's the
So
only one who knows.
God cares about the husband who will be very upset if it's true. Besides which, like, even if it's not true, like, let's say nothing happened, he already feels jealous. Like, it's not, you understand what I'm saying? Like, even if there were witnesses and nothing happened, he still will have something that's like, but if God comes and says, hey, nothing doing here, she's having a kid, that's proof. Get on with your life. You have no right to be jealous. You have no right to go crazy. I've already exonerated her.
That's true. You see, but why do we have by this Avera, this nace? So it's coming to tell you that despite what Hollywood would have you believe, it's men who are the jealous ones.
You mean Hollywood has movies that primarily show the woman as the jealous ones?
Yeah, in the Western secular society literature, women are considered the jealous species.
Really? Even in the old time movies? I thought it was always the men.
Well, you get men and women jealous, but it's the women that are painted with that brush. The women are the jealous type.
That's interesting. Now, why did they do something so ridiculous when it doesn't reflect reality?
That's a good question. I don't know that answer to that one. Why?
Because, like, in order to sell something, don't you have to have a little bit of truth in it?
Yeah, you have to know. I mean, women are jealous. That's true, but not necessarily more jealous than I don't know how you tell. But the Torah is making a point that men have a harder time with jealousy than women do.
Okay.
So much so that they need a miracle.
Right.
And that's a very powerful thing, very important thing. It's the man who needs to be told your wife is okay, because otherwise he won't be able to get over it.
Right.
So for Shalom Bias, in other words, the God's name is erased for Shalom Bias. So that's and there Chazal understood that the whole point is for Shalom Bias, not to catch guilty women.
Oh, it's to preserve the peace, not to look for criminality.
Right. We're not interested in catching, right? But on top of it, is when you don't solve, when something becomes a rampant in society, like Sotah, like murder, like all kinds of other things. So there's a sickness in society, and you're not going to solve it by killing people.
Excellent point. You have to go to the root of the problem, right?
To the root of the problem, exactly. Right. So if it's an individual, a one-off thing, then that might put an end to it. But if it's pervasive throughout society, there's something sick with society. And that's why the rabbis banned it, because you're not going to solve anything like this, whether it's murder or something.
Right. So that would have been true also of the Sinas Chinam. It would have been nice if they had addressed it before the destruction.
What did you say? What?
About Sinas Chinam, like, it would have been nice if they had addressed the issue of Sinas Chinam in the society before the second Beis HaMikdash got destroyed. I'm sure Kamsa and Bar Kamsa was not the first of its kind. I'm sure it was like many fires everywhere. Having gone through COVID, I am certain there were many fires before that. And then something came along, a breeze of Roman something, and the fire became a conflagration.
That's right. 100%. I'm sure there were many, I mean, the greats at that time were exceptional. So I'm sure they saw the sickness in the society.
And what did they do about it? Is anything written about what they did?
That's a very good question. And I'm sure they did. And it was famous by the first temple. We have a fast day called, one of my favorite fast days is the 10th of Teves.
Why?
This is the fast day that cannot, the only fast day that can come out on
On
Friday.
Shabbos. Oh, Friday. Okay.
But it's very interesting you say Shabbos because there is an opinion that if it came out on Shabbos, you would keep it on Shabbos. It's the only fast day outside of Yom Kippur. It's only the only fast day there's a Rabbanan that could push off Shabbos. But our calendar doesn't work like that. So it can't come out on Shabbos. But it can come out on Friday. It's the only fast day that can come out on a Friday.
Right.
So to tell you how important it is, what happened on this day?
Is when the walls were breached?
No.
Oh, when it was surrounded. When it was surrounded.
The walls were surrounded by Nebuchadnezzar. The king of Babylon surrounded Jerusalem.
It was under siege.
Put him under siege. Right. So now, right, we don't quite know. I don't know how big Jerusalem was in those days. The walls that are currently there were much later. But however big it was, to surround the whole city of Jerusalem must have had a pretty big army, right? And there were Nevi'im amongst the Jewish people, and great scholars, Talmidei Chachamim, like the Yirei Shamayim, big people, like we can't imagine that were there, right? And it didn't stop. They didn't wake up. They didn't get it.
What is in us that it's like this? They didn't get it after the first Beis Hamikdash, after the second Beis Hamikdash, after Gedalia. Like, why do we keep making the same mistakes over and over again? It's a little terrifying.
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, you can see that's the big mistake people say about the Holocaust. Did you get the book, by the way?
I did. In fact, I got it just today.
Good. Me too. So that's the mistake people make about the Holocaust. This is in the book. That's the mistake people make about the Holocaust. People ask the question, how come the Jews couldn't see it coming?
I heard that there were rabbis that went around and said, hey, there's a dark cloud over Europe.
There were, 100% there were. The Havatzan talked about it, right?
So what's preventing our ability to see? I mean, if God's really responsible for opening our eyes.
No. We're responsible for opening our eyes.
We're responsible for opening. But can you really see if God doesn't open your eyes?
You have to open your eyes. You can't put that on God.
I guess it does sort of sound like I'm blaming him, but when I look back, I'm like, that's so interesting. I could see it and a certain relative could not see this. Like, why could I see it and they couldn't? Like, I couldn't understand. I just thought, well, God wanted me to see it and the relative, no. You're
right.
saying it's completely us? Like,
right. You see that's what you if you're from, it's because if you're about tshuva, for sure you see something that other people don't see.
But are we responsible for that? Is it really like us completely that like we created our own merit? I don't know. I'm confused by that. Are you saying that God gives everybody the opportunity and some people take it and some people don't just because of ratzon?
That seems to be the case, yes. Otherwise, how else are you going to explain people's...
But couldn't it be that our grandmothers, since they lit the Shabbat candles a certain number of times. That's why we're meriting to be Bal Teshuva.
That's true. But there has to be some sort of will on your part that it's not independent. You have a merit that creates a willingness, an openness, a yira in each person. Your grandmother lit Shabbos candles against pressure not to. So that created an atmosphere in the family, in her children and grandchildren, that passed on, that culminated in you.
I guess if you relate to her, then you can access her merits. But if you don't relate to her, then it's probably difficult to access that merit and have it like have it help you to see things differently.
It's a little bit of a digression, but I'll tell you a phone call I had some time ago. A student called me up, and she told me her daughter's getting married. So I said, Mazel Tov. So she said to me, it's not such a Mazel Tov. So I said, oh, why not? So she said, well, it's not just that he's not Jewish. It's that he's not such a nice guy.
Oy vey. Although in some ways that's actually kind of good, because if you could just show her and she could see he's not a nice guy, you could prevent the whole thing.
Exactly. So I said to her, did you say something to your daughter? So she said to me, no. So I said, why not? Just because I don't want to lose the relationship with my daughter.
Huh. You see that he's not a nice guy, you're not gonna say anything?
Right. So I said to her, you don't care about your daughter, you just care about you.
Ooh, ouch, Rabbi. Ouch, ouch, ouch. But so true, unfortunately.
Is that true of her? So she was taken aback. So she said to me, why do you say such a thing? So I said, well, listen, one day your daughter's going to realize that this guy, when the warm, fuzzy feelings disappear, she's going to realize this guy's a loser, right? She said, yes. And then she's going to say to you, did you know that he was a loser? And you're going to have no option to say, yes, of course, it was obvious. I mean, it was, when she sees it, it's going to be obvious. And she's going to realize that you saw it too. And she's going to ask you why you didn't say anything. And what are you going to say? I didn't say anything because I didn't want to lose that relationship. And she's going to say to you, you don't care about me. You only care about having a relationship with me.
Yep.
So the phone went quiet. And she says, you're right. I'm going to say something.
And did she?
I don't know. I suspect not, because I never heard from her again.
Oh, so this was a while back then.
Yeah. But you see, we're all put in these positions where we can face reality or do what's comfortable.
Oh, that's the ultimate. That you're saying basically, you either stand up and fight, or you lay on the couch and let things happen.
Right. So,
and nobody wants to stand up and fight because they don't want to get all bloodied.
I think no one, but it's a rare individual that will stand up and say something when everybody else is going, just be quiet,
I have the sickness of standing up and saying something. Oh, do they cause blood? Oh, yeah. My goodness. They go all over you.
Right. But the end, Shlomo Melech says that the person who gives the hachas in Mishlei, the person who gives the hachas in the end will have more sweetness and more joy than the person who just goes with the flow. You win in the end. It's painful, and you have a lot of regrets. But you have less regrets than the person who just goes along and doesn't bother.
It's true. If I had to do it over again, I would still do it again, knowing all the horror that would ensue.
Right. Exactly. So that's Sotah. Then right after Sotah, we have Nazir, another very interesting mitzvah. Here is a person who wants to separate from the world just a little bit. And what does he do? He's not allowed to drink wine for 30 days. There's a minimum Nazir. For 30 days. The Haftarah is about, there were two people that were Nazirim for life. One of them was Shimshon, Samson. The Haftarah talks about him. That's the story of Samson. But the general mitzvah is for minimum of 30 days. He's not allowed to drink wine or any grape product, cut his hair, or have any contact with the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Would make my job difficult because I meet a lot of dead people. It's a joke. Anyway, so
is that like a reference to that movie with Bruce Willis, The Sixth Sense or something?
I don't know. Well, he met dead people.
The kid saw dead people everywhere.
Oh yeah.
That's what I thought you were referencing.
No, he was dead. That was the whole point. Spoiler alert, he was dead. But anyway, so this isn't such a big deal, but nevertheless, he becomes Kaddish L'Hashem, holy to God. He achieves a level akin to the Kohen Gadol, and it's a remarkable thing. Nevertheless, he brings a hatas afterwards, a sin offering. Even though it's a very minimal, the level of precious separation that he engages in, it's not that dramatic. For most of us, I don't think wine would be such a big deal for 30 days. Cutting your hair, okay, you can live with it, right? In Sphera, it's a bit of a pain, but you can live with it. And for sure, not having any contact with the dead, but nevertheless, he achieves this tremendous level. So there's a couple of points here that are very fascinating. One is the tolerance of the Torah. But even though he brings the hatas, because really this is not the way to achieve this level. The world, again, the Almighty did not create the world with a mistake. And if God create the world, you can achieve this kedusha, this closeness with God, in the normal way. You don't have to do this.
But it's easier if you do it this way, you're saying. Because you're creating precious.
It's a precious, but it's not the precious that really the Torah says you should be doing. But you listen to the tolerance of the Torah that it says you can do it. You're going to have to bring a hatas, a sin offering afterwards, but you can do it. It's a very powerful parenting concept here. In fact, the Chazal say there's more power in a yes than there is in a no.
We recently went through this. We decided to give something for free to put the kid in a good mood so that the whole family could be affected also.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'd be saying, hey, man, on our videos for a while.
Right. So now what I wanted to bring out was the Mesilas Shalom makes a phenomenal point. So the Nazir is three things that he's not allowed to do: cut his hair, drink wine, and contact with the dead. When it comes to the wine, it's not only wine. Now he's not allowed to drink wine because he's not allowed to get drunk.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he has to stay serious for 30 days. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Torah says it's not only wine, you can't have any grapes or grape products.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a grape.
Well, that's rough.
What's that?
That's rough. It's one thing you can't have wine, but no grapes, forget about it.
You're joking? You're serious?
I'm actually serious. I'm not a big wine fan, but don't take away my grapes.
Really, you love grapes? Okay, good.
No, the doctor took away all fruits from me, except, well, I begged him, and now he's giving me berries.
Oh dear. Okay. So So the Nazir can't have any. So the Mesilas Yesharim says this is the paradigm that Chazal used for all the Gedalim, for all the fences that they made. They used this principle. In other words, there is nothing wrong per se with the Nazir, technically speaking, of having a grape.
Mm-hmm.
The Torah made a fence. It's an example of within the Torah of an actual fence, which is an interesting concept because a grape now for a Nazir is a derisa. We think of fences as the Rabbanans, as rabbinical ordinances. But for the Nazir, a grape, even though it's a fence on what he's not supposed to do, which is drink alcohol or alcoholic wine, nevertheless, out of the fence, he can't drink wine, he can't drink grape juice, he can't have grapes, he can't have grape skins, he can't chew on grape pits, nothing. Right? As a fence. Right? So the Mesilas Yesharim says this is the paradigm. The Torah brings this to show Chazal how to make a fence. So we're all familiar with Kashrut. Kashrut, the source of Kashrut, is the Torah says, that you can't cook a kid in its mother's milk. It says it 3 times. One time means the actual cooking, one time is eating, and one time is having any benefit from it. Each one means a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, the core issue is milk, a kid in its mother's milk. That's what the Torah says. Nothing about chicken, nothing about roast beef, nothing about cheeseburgers, nothing about when a Torah, right? All of these things would not be, well, cheeseburgers is an interesting question, whether you're actually cooking the cheese with the milk. But if you had the burger and you had the meat and milk per se would not be a problem, according to the Torah. In other words, you want to have a glass of milk with your hamburger, according to the Torah, you could do it.
Right, because it's a kid. A kid is a goat, no?
Kid in his mother's milk, right, exactly.
But a kid is a goat, isn't it? Isn't it a baby goat?
Baby goat.
Okay.
Right? So Chazal learned from this Nazir how to apply a geder. When it comes to shatnez, you're not allowed to wear woolen linen.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same garment. You can have cotton and linen. You can have linen and wool and plastic. You can mix anything with anything you want. Right? There is no geder on this mitzvah. The rabbis did not extend it to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why did they do that with kashrut, but they didn't do it with shatnez, even though the same concepts are gone by both of them? You're taking 2 objects that in of themselves are perfectly legitimate and kosher. You can wear as much wool as you want. You can wear as much linen as you want. You can eat as much meat as you want. You can drink as much milk as you want. In of themselves, they're perfectly fine. But when you put the 2 of them together, it creates something that's toxic on a spiritual level.
Right.
But with one, they extended it far beyond the boundaries of what meat and milk are. And with the other one, wool and linen, they didn't touch it. You just can't wear wool and linen together in the same garment.
Yeah, but it makes sense because food is like a connector socially. You're having let's say you're in sales. You end up doing a lot of deals over food or golf or whatever. If food is like a connector, it's a social connector. Whereas shatnez, I don't know if clothes are much of a connector unless it's between women.
That's true. That's true. But you see, what you're doing is you're looking at the end result and realizing that kashrut is a meaningful experience. And those how kosher homes and kitchens and the way we eat is very much the fabric of our experience as a Jew.
Mhm.
If a non-Jew came along and said, I want to be Jewish, but I only want to follow the mitzvahs of the Torah, his kosher kitchen would be very different than ours,
Right.
right? So, because much of what we experience as a Jew, a full Jew, is a relationship to kashrut, a relationship to the way we practice our daily lives in a way that's shaped by Chazal. The question is, how did Chazal know that these extensions would be meaningful and help us in our lives? And they didn't do that with Shatnez. So the Mesilas Yesharim is explaining that the Torah took wine, and because we understand the concept of wine, there were three things you couldn't do. Remember, cut your hair,
Drink wine.
the dead, and wine.
Uh-huh.
Right. So the Torah, when it came to wine, extended out the things you couldn't do. It didn't do that with death. It didn't say anybody who's sick, don't go near. Right?
Mhm.
It didn't say don't go into a hospital.
Mhm.
It didn't say, you understand? When it came to cutting your hair, it didn't say don't hold any sharp objects.
Don't
Right?
color your hair.
Right, you understand? It didn't say anything. It just said, you understand? Therefore, a Nazir is not allowed to cut his hair. He's just not allowed to have any contact with the dead. But when it came to wine, the Torah expanded it out because we understand the concept of wine. We understand how the connection between grapes could be from wine. Grapes and all the products that come from grapes. So Chazal understood from that when the Torah says don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, and didn't say don't eat meat and milk together. In other words, the Torah explained the avera of meat and milk in a parable, in a story, in a concept that we could relate to. There's something offensive about cooking a kid in its mother's milk. Sure, the kid is dead, but we're not talking about that, right? You kill a kid, you kill a goat, a baby goat, and you cook it in its mother's milk. The mother doesn't know, the kid is dead. You follow?
Yeah, but it's
There's something that rubs us up the wrong way. We get a sense of this is not nice.
right.
But the Torah didn't say don't eat meat and milk together. When it came to Shatnez, it didn't give us any sense of the reason behind it. It just said don't wear wool and linen together. It didn't say don't have a sheep, right? Don't use a sheep to plow your flax field. Right? It didn't use any parable. It just said don't wear wool and linen together. There's no depth to that. There is depth to it. There is a meaning behind it, but the Torah didn't explain it in a way that we can relate to it viscerally. But it did with meat and milk. It didn't say just don't eat meat and milk. It said don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. In other words, when you eat meat and milk together, it's like you're cooking it's like you're cooking a kid in its mother's milk. And therefore, Chazal said here, there's depth. And therefore, when you expand it out, it's sort of like having you go and you buy a desk or piece of furniture from IKEA. Right? You put it together, and that's it. Right? If you try and play around with it, you try and extend it, if you try and add to it, if you try and shorten it, you don't do anything to it, it's going to fall apart because it's cheap. You understand it's cheap. That's what you're buying. It's cheap. I buy it because it's cheap. The same piece of furniture from a craftsman whose hand built the whole thing from the ground up and spent a year doing it, right? This is a quality piece of furniture that can be extended, can be added to, can be taken away from, there's things you can do with it because it has value, it has depth to it.
Mm-hmm.
So Chazal understood the same thing with meat and milk, that because the way the Torah told us it, they could expand it out. They could take meat and milk and then say 6 hours. They could take meat and milk and say you can't put it on the same plate. You have to have different utensils. They could expand out the thing, and it would still have a meaning to it.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the practice that we have of Kashrut today is a meaningful experience. It isn't just a process to separate us from the non-Jewish world.
Mm-hmm.
It's keeping a kosher house has a resonance to it that if you raise your children in a kosher house in such a way, it's very hard for them. It's very hard for anybody who's raised in a kosher house to live. Rav Yaakov Weinberg, he said he keeps kosher. He said we keep kosher better than he does.
Why?
This is because he would find it revolting to eat a pig.
Uh-huh.
In the same way that somebody, the average American would find it revolting to eat a dog. But if you grow up in the Philippines, you don't have such a problem.
Right.
So when you grow up in a kosher home, it imbues you with a way of eating, a way of functioning, the way of living that is very hard to break away from in a meaningful way. And Chazal understood that, and therefore the Gedarim, the fences of Torah, the fences of the Rabbanim, are not simple things that they just added just because they wanted to, prevent something, which that's true, they did. But the way they figured out what it is to add so that it would be hundreds of years later and it'd still find it meaningful. That's why the halacha is that a later Beis Din cannot undo the fence of a previous Beis Din unless they have the same degree of wisdom, because they won't understand what the meaning of this gather is. It's very interesting. This is what destroyed the conservative movement and the reform movement. The conservative movement, they thought they were so smart by allowing people to drive on Shabbos. They had a big problem because these conservative shuls were in these old communities, and the young people were moving out to the suburbs because they couldn't afford to live near the shul, and they couldn't go to shul, and they were losing members. So they thought, we're smart, right? We know what we're doing. These old time rules are silly, and we'll let people drive to shul if they're going to shul on Shabbat. They can only drive if they're going to shul. That's the only way they can drive, right? You follow?
Mm-hmm.
But apart from the fact whether they took it seriously or not, that's a different point. But what it did was it destroyed all these inner city shuls, because the price of the houses of the people around the shul suddenly dropped because the demand, they didn't have to live near the shul anymore.
Right.
So these communities died. So the people who were the most committed to the shul were stuck. They couldn't sell their houses anymore. The new shuls that were opening up in the suburbs were attracting people, but they couldn't get the old timers who were the bastions and the tradition of the shul that they needed. They couldn't move because they couldn't afford to. So these inner cities became ghost towns.
Right. Destroyed the community by allowing this thing.
Destroyed the community. Right? And the Reform did the same thing. They were getting all these children of converts, children of intermarriages, showing up in shul. So they said, "Oh, we're going to we'll make a big change. We'll have patrilineal descent. If your father's Jewish, you're Jewish." Right? So now no one feels bad, and they're all good, right? And what that did was it killed all these classes, because the women who were showing up in the classes in the reform shows because they wanted to convert, because their husbands wouldn't marry them unless they were Jewish, So they stopped going to shul because they said you don't need to be Jewish anymore because the father's Jewish, and it killed their classes, and that killed a big part of their community because the women, even if whether you question whether they were Jewish or not, but nevertheless, when they went to classes and they took it seriously, they became they were the bastions, they were a big part of the Reformed community of people that believed it.
Believed it and created a community around it.
Right. They were the serious people. Well, you can argue all you want about it, but nevertheless, as soon as literally it was like a very short amount of time after they said we're going to go patrilineal descent, all these classes disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Four classes disappeared?
What's that?
In the Reform shuls, the classes for the women disappeared.
Because the women no longer were interested?
The women didn't need to go.
Because they weren't Jewish and they were being accepted, whereas before they were required to convert.
Because the men wouldn't marry them because they wanted their kids to be Jewish. So then once the Reform said patrilineal descent, so they said we don't need to convert anymore. So it killed all the classes. So you see, is that when the Chazal added a decree, you think it's such a simple thing, you're solving such a problem. And sometimes you make a decree and it just makes it far, it's very hard to, the level of thinking that goes into this. The Mesilas Yesharim points out that the Chazal used Nazir as the paradigm for how they thought about whether a mitzvah can be expanded or not. It's a very interesting history that it says that when Ezra was leaving Babylon and coming to Israel, Yerushalayim, to rebuild the base of Mikdash, the second base of Mikdash. So he called on people to come and rebuild the base of Mikdash. And the people who came were the poorest. The rich people didn't want to go. And it's very interesting. He said, if you don't come, don't send your donations. He wouldn't take donations. It's interesting when you think about relative to today. He wouldn't take your donations. If you're not going to come, we don't want you're not going to assuage your guilt by donating. It was very, very difficult. They didn't have money. It was the poorest people went. So they all show up, and the script we have the story, right? It's written down. So they all show up, and he tells them to divorce your non-Jewish wives.
Mm-hmm.
So here, the people who are going are the fanatics.
Mm-hmm.
The Fum of the Fum. These are the Charedim, the Fum of the Fum. They're taking the Torah the most serious. You're going to build the base of Mikdash. You're supposed to live in Israel. Right, you follow?
Mm-hmm.
After 70 years, they're marrying out.
Doesn't take very long.
So I forget who said it, but they asked the question, how come in 70 years they're marrying out, and we don't have, for the most, it's very rare you'll find a frum person married out. Guys, Shabbos, keeping kashrut, showing up for shul 3 times a day. Is married to a non-Jew. You don't find such a thing. Right? So how come? So that's the takanas that they made at that time to stop that. And the Judaism we have today was a lot of it was created from that experience, that we need something else, and that's part of the reason, if not the reason, that we had a second base of Mikdash. It was because we couldn't handle the galus. We needed another 400 years and that's when the gates of wisdom opened up. Most of, if not all of the Torah that we have comes out of the second base of Mikdash. We have very little prior to that, because we needed that. We needed the Talmud to enable us to last another 2,000 years.
Interesting.
Right? We couldn't do it without that. So the Mighty sent us into Galus, but we couldn't make it. And there's a very similar experience we talked about by Mitzrayim. Right? The Jewish people were supposed to stay there longer, but they couldn't handle it, so God took them out.
Mm-hmm. We can't handle this one either. We need to get out.
I agree. Go home. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi Boris. Have a good night. Shabbat
Good
shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.